Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Wisdom in Christ podcast. Today I am here with Cameron Adamson, my fellow brother and Freemason, and we are going to be talking about Freemasonry, what it can do for people, his experience with Freemasonry, some of the symbols, and just different things that we feel like could potentially share some light on what Masonry is and maybe inspire people to look into it if they have a desire to and learn more. So, so yeah. So Cameron, you are a fellow Canadian brother. Yes?
I am born and raised in Winnipeg, Manitoba, but lived in Windsor, Ontario since 2006. So both Canadian cities, obviously Winnipeg and Windsor. But yeah, Windsor is interesting little fact. Windsor is the furthest southern city in Canada. It's actually south of Detroit. To get to America from here, you have to go north to hit up Detroit. So I always say, I moved to where Canada starts. So.
Nice. So you're like right, grew up like right on the American Canadian border,
Well,
base or
I
no?
mean, growing up, I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm 41 years old. I was born in 83, and I lived in Winnipeg basically from 83 until 2004. Then I lived in Ottawa for a couple of years, and then Windsor. So Windsor from 2006, I've lived here on, is like it is as much on the border as you can be. It takes maybe on a good day 30 seconds to cross the border and be in the States.
Wow.
Winnipeg, it's not as close, but still, relatively speaking, I mean, I do remember taking trips over the border into Minneapolis or Minnesota. It was always a big deal. And that was like, if I recall, two. So, relatively speaking, most of Canadians live within, if I recall correctly, and somebody might, correct me in the comments, but if I recall correctly, 90% of the Canadian population lives within like 100 kilometers of the US border, which would be like 70 miles, I think, something to that effect. So, every Canadian kind of does live close to the US border.
Okay. So I guess what was it like growing up out there? Is it like foresty? Did you guys, like play outside a lot? Was it like more like what was it like, like your childhood as far as that goes? Were you closer into the city areas? Is it like city kind of stuff? Like what was it kind of like?
Oh no, Winnipeg's uh, I mean, relatively speaking, a big city. Because again, when you compare, U.S. to Canada, it's if I recall correctly, it's like 32 million Canadians to 350 million Americans or something like that. So obviously the numbers but if I recall, the population of Winnipeg is I think 750, 800,000 people. So I mean, it's a city proper, right? And so yeah, I mean, growing up in Winnipeg, um, I suppose it'd be equivalent to kind of growing up in most, any kind of city between 500,000 and a million people, let's say. So we had sports, obviously. Growing up in Winnipeg, I fell in love with CFL football and Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And CFL is better than NFL. I'm sorry to throw that out there, starting on such a controversial topic, but three downs is way better than four down football. So, I mean, Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I'm, a bad Canadian. I never got into the Winnipeg Jets because growing up, the Winnipeg Jets moved to, at the time, I think it was Las Vegas or whatever. They left the city for much of my childhood, and they came back obviously. But so I never really got into hockey. So I was always a bad Canadian that way. So I always watched football. But yeah, I loved typical. We all loved professional wrestling. Grew up outside a lot. I liked it's a typical. It was a very wonderful and very typical middle class suburban life, and yeah, I loved it.
That's awesome, man. So I guess you told me in one of our previous conversations, I think on your live stream, I was talking with you because that's actually like, we started talking a little bit because of your live streams on your channel, which is Square and Compass Promotions, isn't that right? Square and Compass
Yes.
Promotions. And so I was kind of hopping in the chat box. I'd seen your video that you did with Brother Fluff. And so I subscribed to you. Then I saw you were live one day and hopped in the chat box. And And for those of you guys that don't know, Brother Fluff does like TikTok videos and stuff too. So I had been introduced, he's a Mason online. So I had been watching some of his stuff. I looked him up on YouTube, then I found Cameron. And then, so I was in your chat box on the live stream and started talking with you. And you mentioned, I asked you how you got into Masonry. And you mentioned that your dad was a Mason. Is that right? You said your dad?
Yeah, yeah. So my pops is was and is a Mason, um, as were both of my grandfathers. My grandfather on my dad's side, so my dad's dad, he passed away before I was born, so I never got to meet him. But he was a Mason in England. And then my papa, which is my mom's dad, my grandfather, my mom's side, he was a Mason, and I got to know him very well, and he was a great grandfather, obviously, and loved him. So yeah, both of them. And then I believe it actually goes back further to the great grandparents, though I don't recall. I never met them. Um, but there's a story I was lucky enough. My dad gave me his Masonic ring a few years ago, which if everybody's seen a Masonic ring, has got this grand compasses symbol on it. And there's a dent in the back, which supposedly has been there forever. They think that before my great grandfather gave it to my grandfather, he had to dent the back to make it fit because they weren't resizing rings back then. So, but yeah, so I got a good lineage. I got an uncle so I got a good lineage of Freemasons in the family.
You got to make what you got to make it work with what you got, right? If
You
you
do.
don't have the
You
ring
make it
that
work.
fits and you couldn't resize it back then,
A
you work
hammer is
with what you
perfectly
got.
fine. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
sure
that's
there was a
awesome.
resizing. I'm sure it was possible. This would have been what? I mean, would have been 40s or 50s that it would have been passed down. So I'm sure they had resizing technology then, but maybe it's just, Winnipeg frugality
Yeah,
kicking in.
yeah. No, that's awesome, man. So I guess what like so you were introduced were you at the lodge at a young age, like occasionally, like for family, because there's like open houses and stuff, at least in America. I don't know if it's a different out there in your jurisdiction, but
Oh
we
yeah,
do
yeah.
open houses and stuff. And so like were you kind of introduced to like the lodge a little bit too, even at a young age, or not so much? No.
Oh yeah, it was part of kind of the atmosphere of kind of growing up. I mean, it wasn't the type of thing where we'd come home and dad would stories, or I'd come home and dad would give me with stories of the lodge or anything like that. It wasn't talked about every day, but it was certainly,
Yeah,
it was understood that it was kind of part of the household. And they
right.
had, I remember going to Christmas parties where they had Masonic events, or um, going to, family events. I remember on a few occasions, because my dad's lodge met upstairs. So on a few occasions, upstairs of the Legion or a bar. I'm not sure it was allowed to or not, but this was in the 80s and 90s. So it's, you can't get in trouble anymore. But I remember going and sitting at the bar waiting for my dad to finish his meeting. Um, and, all the friends were there kind of thing. So I remember all of those events being a lot of fun, and kind of just you grew up with an understanding, that Masonry was kind of part of the household. And certainly when my dad became the worshipful master of the lodge in 1995 was the first time, if I recall correctly. It was even more so understood because he was very busy. And then also, plenty of times I got a babysitter because my mom and dad would go out to a lodge function or some type of special event, and then you'd hear stories later on about, my mom dancing on the tables to have fun or whatever it is at some of these functions. So you kind of it was part of the atmosphere of the household for sure.
Nice. Nice. That's really cool, man. So I guess like what, so you wanted to join partly because of your father, I guess, was a huge inspiration for your joining, or
I
was
mean,
there also a
yeah.
moment where you kind of wanted to do it for yourself too? And like what did that look like for you?
I mean, it's hard to say, right? Because I kind of can't run the alternate history, right? Like it's
Right.
possible if my dad had never himself been a Mason, I may have never heard of it or heard of it in passing, and the
Right.
interest may not have peaked. So I kind of, because I can't kind of know what the alternate history was. I kind of have to give the credit for me wanting to join to my dad. The extent to which I've become involved and active in the lodge and engaged with the lodge, that is more as a result of me finding something in it that I really like. Because there are many people who join who have a family connection who don't remain engaged in Freemasonry. They may pay their dues every year, but you don't see them at lodge, or you see them
Right.
very rarely. And so I kind of have to give the desire to join um, to my dad and to kind of the Masons I grew up around, and again knowing he was part of it, but the desire to become active and engaged in it, that was more kind of not based on anything my dad told me, but just based on what I saw when I joined and what I felt when I joined.
So I
And
guess
then
that,
there's go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and that's also one of the reasons why I'm happy I made the choice to, um, and I've seen it work both ways. So people have their own choices, right? I grew up in Winnipeg, but I joined Freemasonry in Windsor, which is about, well, I mean, to fly, it's like a 5 hour flight. It's 2 hour flight to Toronto, and then you fly down to Windsor. It's another hour or so. But it was like, if I had joined in Winnipeg, I would have joined as like, Harry's son, as opposed to joining as Cameron, which I was all, I love my dad, and I'm proud of him both Masonically and otherwise. But it was kind of nice to join um, as Cameron, and not as Harry's son. And that way, what was really special is, instead of me going to my dad's lodge the first time, my dad came to my lodge, and I got to introduce him to everybody. So that was kind of a fun little moment. So yeah.
That is cool. Yeah, that's really cool. So I guess you were able to kind of have the Masonic initiation experience and experience what it is to become a Mason without everybody thinking, like having preconceived ideas about who you are and stuff because they knew your father. Yeah,
Yeah, or like seeing my dad in me, right? And
yeah,
it's one of those things where there's I think it kind of depends on the individual Mason. I mean, I love family, but I've always also kind of had a pretty fierce independent streak. And so I liked the idea of going through my Masonic career kind of on my own, and then bringing my dad into my Masonic career as
right.
to going into his. And that way, even when I could visit his lodge for the first time, which was a really special moment, that's when he gave me the ring. It was as a member of Windsor with my own Masonic story, kind of I was telling. So,
That's
but there are
awesome.
others who I'm sure, and I've met brothers who really wanted to and made a point to want to join their father's lodge, even to the point where if they're living somewhere else, they will travel back to that lodge just to join that lodge with their dad. So it's a personal thing, right? That's the beauty of
Right,
Freemasonry. Everybody kind of has their own way they want to approach it, and there's no right or wrong answer. Both are equally valid.
right.
Right? It's just kind of how you are as an individual, and your personality will kind of dictate the paths you take.
That's awesome that you had that experience with him. And I agree with you that I think that they get him giving you the ring and stuff in his lodge and you being able to take him to your lodge, that's really cool. And I also agree that those kinds of things, each person is going to be so different. I have my friend here in our local lodge here in Utah, and his grandpa was a Mason. His dad wasn't, but his grandpa was, and everybody knew his grandpa, and he wanted to be in the same lodge of his grandpa, and so that fit really well for him. So it is totally cool to see the different ways that people want to approach it and how both are okay, and people are going to have a good experience, I think, if they do what they feel is right, if they feel that's the right thing for them to do. So you mentioned that your activity and your engagement in masonry was because of your own uh, you finding something in masonry that really clicked with you. So what is that thing that you found? Like, what is that for you? I know that's kind of a big open-ended question, but if you could share some of the things that you found in masonry, that would be really awesome.
And it's such a struggle, I think, also to try to put it into words, right? Because words can sometimes have a limiting quality to them.
Right.
It, The simple answer I always give when people ask me what it is, about Freemasonry that I like, my response is always, I like the way it sounds. And what I mean by that is, if you think of, for me, I love music. So if you think of your favorite song, right? It's not something that you can actively, like, I can't be driving down the road or whatever and say, okay, the next song on the radio, that's going to be my favorite song, right? It's not like a conscious, you don't choose to fall in love with the song. It's
Mm.
just, for some reason, something about your personality combined with your history, combined with what you're going through in that particular moment, combined with a million other factors, will lead you to latch on to a particular song, and that's your favorite song. It's, because for me, my for a long time, my favorite song was Simple Man by Leonard Skinner.
It's a good song.
um
It's a
it's
really
a
good
great
song.
song, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, lately, though, it's switched over to Prodigal by Blacktop Mojo. um but if you look at either of those songs, right, 50 people could listen to either of those songs. We'll use Skinner's Simple Man because it's a more well-known song, right? Um, 50 people can listen to that song. They're hearing the exact same thing I'm hearing, the exact same words, the same notes. But for me, it's my favorite song. For other people, it might be a very good song, and other people might hate it. It's
Right.
not about the actual song. So, the for whatever reason, and then it gets hard to quantify, but I'll try, right? There's just something about me and my personality, my history, and what I was going through when I was initiated that caused Freemason to speak to me in a way that it just doesn't for other people. And we've all known people, and there are Masons watching this, you've known people who, or you may be one of the people who either joins and just feels like this isn't right for me and doesn't stick around, or joins and likes it, but it doesn't become kind of the primary motivator of your life the way it did for me, which is perfectly fine. It's hard to necessarily know, and I know Grand Lodges have put a lot of time and effort into trying to encourage lodges to get to know applicants better, spend more time with them before they become members, to try to make sure that there is a positive experience. But sometimes you just don't know until you can't know if you're going to like the song or not till you hear it. You can kind of guess, and you can kind of try to talk to them about genres they like or whatever it is, but at a certain point you just kind of got to listen to the song to know. And I think with Freemasonry, at a certain point you just kind of got to join, and see, right? And you can do your best, but it's tough. So there's, the simple answer is, I just like the way Freemasonry sounds. And then some of the specific things that spoke to me, I I loved the idea of an organ. Even this was 2007 I joined, but I loved the idea of an organization that accepts, men of all faiths, including, kind of spiritual, so belief in a supreme being, without needing a specific faith. I appreciate the fact that if you are, and I agree with the fact that if you are like an avowed atheist, you can't join. But otherwise, I appreciated the fact that we have an organization where men of all faiths can join. I appreciated the fact that it was not just welcoming, but like the philosophies behind the idea of, there is no, like, there's no, like, the CEO of the company's up here and the janitor's down here, whatever it is, right? I like the idea of, you can have the janitor be the worshipful master, and if he is, then everybody else in the lodge kind of has to accept his rule, right? Whatever you are, right? The idea of, it's the merits within the lodge that determine the respect that you earn in the lodge, right? I always appreciated that. Um, and more than anything else, I think, and we can talk about this more. I kind of view being alive as being part of a team, like your team humanity, right? And you kind of have a responsibility to try to make the world the way you'd want it to be for everybody, or as good as you can. And there's a million different avenues and ways to do that. But I think Freemasonry, in my opinion, is, from what I've seen, one of the best ways to make the world a better place. And so getting a chance to, or at least whether the world can be made better or not, I suppose is an open question, but at least it gives you an opportunity to fight to make the world better. I've said, and I think I understood this really early on when I joined. Although it took me a while to put it into words, right? Because people ask, what is the core belief of Freemasons? And my answer is, to my knowledge, there's approximately 700,000 Masons in the States. So my short answer is there's 700,000 answers to that. But for me, the core belief of Freemasonry is that the world can be made better through the application of brotherly love, relief, and truth. And so wanting to be part of something that can try to make the world better, it really spoke to me. And even it never was so much for me about, and I'm not knocking the person who made this kind of motto, and I understand what they're trying to say, right? You often hear from Freemasonry, it's about making good men better. Um, Even from a young age, growing up with Freemasonry, I always saw Freemasonry as more of an outward facing group. It was Christmas parties, it was charity events, it was my dad being part of not just a lodge, but being part of a community. Right, he's part of a lodge that supported the community. And when I joined, even though I'd heard this idea of to make good men better, I've always viewed Freemasonry first and foremost as something that makes the world better. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, but I've kind of chosen Freemasonry as my way because it speaks to me so strongly.
Right. No, I love that. I love your emphasis on it actually doing good in the world because, you see all the different things that Masons do, and I see every day now that I am a Mason, which, by the way, I'm a pretty new Mason, like about a year now. So you have a lot more probably firsthand experience of this, but just helping with the Special Olympics, all the kids that have different disabilities and things like that, and helping with the Special Olympics, and then seeing, the Shriners Hospital and all the stuff that they do, and seeing masonry does do a lot of good for the world. And I see that firsthand, and I think that sometimes people don't realize that masonry is actually actively doing a lot for the world to help make the world a better place too. you know
And
they
just the existence of it, I think sometimes, and don't get me wrong, the like the charitable acts that are either done on the more kind of jurisdictional or grand lodge levels, excuse me, like Masonic Charitable Foundation, out of United Grand Lodge of England, right, is an example of like an organized efforts to, it could be any number of things, provide aid relief for natural disasters that have happened throughout the world, or provide funding for like care homes, or you have California does things like Masons for Mitts, where they help purchase gloves and mitts and clothing like that. So there are those specific acts, but even just the existence of Freemasonry, like I've known Masons who were suicidal. Now, what kept them from jumping off the balcony was they had another Masonic meeting to go to, right? And it's like, or I've known Masons who were elderly, who, the exclusive social contact that they had with anybody was either the lodge meetings themselves or some of those social activities like the coffee clubs or the dinners that come along with Freemasonry, right? And I mean, you look at, there's this brother out of Texas who publishes a lot of different statistics related to Freemasonry. And one thing he published a few months ago was the average life expectancy of a Mason in Texas, at least, was 10 years, 10 years longer than the average life expectancy of a non-Mason.
Hmm.
And if you look at, I've talked about this on the podcast, if you look at what they show about the health benefits of being part of, an association or just relationships, like, uh, and I'm sure somebody in the comments might correct me. I'm not saying I'm a doctor or nothing, but if I recall the studies correctly, so, think about, if you're a Mason watching this, all the Masons that end up in the hospital and receive visits from their brothers. And if you're like me, you've probably been a part of a lot of these visits. Um, if you have a heart attack, a stroke, whatever it is, end up in the hospital and receive no visitors, you're 2.5 more times likely to end up dying in the hospital or dying from complications than if you receive visitors. And I know at least two Masons I can think of at the top of my head who the the exclusive visitors they received were exclusively Freemasons and brothers, because they didn't have family or the family was out of the country or whatever it is. And so just again, it's somebody posted this about professional wrestling and I stole it and applied to Freemasonry. He said, like, the quote initial is, your independent professional wrestling event might be the only thing someone has to look forward to, but you could apply that to Freemasonry as well, right? And so, and you could say, well, yes, that's making the lives of the brothers better, but that makes the world better too, because if they have connections, they're more likely to be healthy, which means they don't need to be at the hospital, which means those resources go to people who need it. It's one of those things where there's a snowballing effect. And so I think sometimes one of the kind of errors, misconceptions that Masons will make, and older Masons make this one as well, or I shouldn't say older, but more veteran Masons, if that's the word, been in it for a long time. This idea of like Masonic, the way Masonry benefits the world is through giving money to charities and things of that nature, which is true, but it also makes the world better by providing a place and things which people can look forward to in the world.
Right.
So,
No, yeah, that's awesome. And there is a lot of people that need that love and need that brotherly love, like you said earlier, being one of the principal tenets of Freemasonry. And I think that as we not only are the people that we're showing that brotherly love to being benefited by it, but we are too, because when you're serving other people and you're caring about other people, that brings that same happiness and joy into your life, and you feel more of it too. It amplifies and grows. And I think that it's all kind of connected as Masonry is helping individuals have hope and get and receive brotherly love, and then those individuals are having a bigger impact on the world around them, and then that impact on the world around them is trickling around. So it's kind of like a positive feedback loop, that kind of occurs because of the principal tenets of Freemasonry. And I think that is a really beautiful statement, that you made about people having Masonry give them hope and to give them something to look forward to, and then also them receiving that brotherly love and kindness from their fellow brothers. So that's awesome. And one other thing I wanted to add to that it reminded me of is back in the day, I don't remember exactly where I heard this, but there was this hospital where I think it was like it wasn't in America, it was in like a different, more of a developing country where a lot of kids weren't, there was lots of children in the hospital and they weren't receiving any love. They weren't receiving any form of attention or care from any adults, because there's just all these children in a hospital without any visitors. And they followed those children and what happened to them later in their lives. And they had more problems, more developmental issues, and more, just psychological or physical problems. And so when we can take that time to show that brotherly love to each other, whether it be one of our own brothers or even, somebody who isn't a Mason, we're kind of doing that in a way, like we're sharing that love, and it does help people in a way that sometimes I don't think we fully understand, you know.
no, I agree completely. With that, the study that you referenced with the children doesn't surprise me at all. I've seen enough to see kind of the importance of connections, and again, there's Freemasonry is by no means the exclusive way to do any of these things. But it is kind of the way I chose, again, because for whatever reason, there's something connected to my personality and myself that just Freemasonry speaks to me. Other people may try to make the world a better place through involvement with their church or a sports team or whatever it is, right? But I think Freemasonry 100% provides those opportunities to make the world a better place, or to make the world better as much as you can.
Yeah. And I think that even a lot of Masons end up doing both of them too, where they do have their regular, religious activity that they participate in, and then their lodge as well. So I think everybody gets to leave their impact in the world in the way that they see as being right, and the way that they see as being a good kind of avenue and vehicle for doing that. And I think Masonry does provide a really good vehicle for people to be able to do that. And the fraternity aspect of it, where you're all brothers, does kind of help create a situation where you're looking outwardly, like you were saying, and who can I help? Who can I look out for? This person hasn't been at lodge for a while. Can I check in on them? You know, and just seeing how, as brothers, we do have a tendency to check into each other. Even my own lodge, I've had brothers just going to lodge one day where you're not feeling like fully like yourself, and then you go to lodge and you find yourself laughing over dinner before lodge starts, and your fellow brother just made your day just because he said something that just was like funny, or just there's just like a good healing aspect to that sort of brotherhood, and that kind of um, fraternal bonds that can be created through Masonry. So I think
No,
that's
I
beautiful.
I agree completely, right? I mean, don't want anybody to get it twisted, right? Freemasonry can also be incredibly hard, and oftentimes it can be a pain in the ass, depending on how engaged and active you are or want to be. So as with anything worth it, though, right? It's not always kind of sunshine and rainbows. It can be incredibly hard, but so sometimes the struggle is also kind of worth it, because you're struggling for something that you hope, or you're struggling to make the world better. So in essence, it probably should be a struggle in some senses, right? Because if it was easy, then kind of anybody could do it. So
Yep. Yeah. So I guess like with pretty much anything that's good, you're gonna have times where you don't want to do it. Like if you have, or times where it's a little bit harder for you to appreciate it, because like you said, not everything is completely just perfect, like just all joy all the time and all perfect all the time. But I do think that Masonry does provide a place where, more often than not, I do feel that kind of, like you said, that song where there's a sound to it that really is just really fits me well, and does boost my mood, and does make my day a little bit better. And I leave the lodge feeling refreshed and good and thankful that I went. And it has that kind of effect on us. So it's kind of worth it in a way, wouldn't you say? All of the
well, and that's the thing to hold on to, right?
Yeah.
It's the song of it. It's what you it's you want to kind of keep holding on to that, because, well, I mean, it depends. So, but this goes kind of to what we talked about at the start, because I've known many Freemasons who join, and they attend maybe 2 or 3 times a year. They come for dinner, hang out. It's great to see them, and then you don't see them anymore, until maybe, knock on wood, God forbid, they find themselves in the hospital, and then their brothers come to visit them, and then they kind of remember what Freemasonry is about and appreciate that, and kind of come out more. But you do get that. But also, as with any group, right? When it comes to Freemasonry, you need kind of lodge leadership. You need people in charge of different areas. You need people in charge of the buildings. You need people and that is when, as current master and several times past master, like you work your 8 hours or whatever it is, and then you're the master of a lodge, and this brother is upset with this brother over who knows what it is, and you have to mediate that, and you have to organize a degree, so you have to get all the parts organized. And maybe you're like Ryan in the States, whatever it is, like maybe you're somebody who's in charge of a building and there's a leaky pipe or whatever, right? And it can kind of, especially in 2025, where burnout just in life or different facets of life is so significant. You can definitely get Masonic burnout, and the things to do in that case, at least what I try to do, is just what you said: try to remember the song and remember why it's important, right? Why? Because even if you are organizing a degree and you don't really want to organize a degree, well, think about why it's important to organize, why it's important to have the degree, right? Why it matters that that degree takes place and what it means for the world and what it can mean for the person joining. You kind of have to go back to that, because I mean, even for me in my Masonic experience, the first probably 5 years or so were, I look back at them, incredibly easy. I showed up to every meeting pretty much. I don't think I missed. I think if I recall correctly, I missed like 2 meetings in those 5 years. But I just showed up, I listened, I paid attention. I didn't have a lot of work responsibilities. But once I started becoming junior warden, you have to prepare the meals. This guy's vegetarian, this guy's lactose intolerant. And then suddenly it's like, oh, there's actually some responsibilities here, right? And then you become master. And then there are those brothers who then, you know, they'll become members of 2 or 3 lodges, or Scottish Rite or York Rite. And now they've got all these additional things. And then they're part of the temple board. And so just remember, remember why it's important and what it is that you love about the song, and what it is you first loved about it, and kind of try to keep that in mind all the time, because otherwise, like I said, it's if you are fighting to make the world better, which is what I think Freemasonry is doing. I mean, the first word there is key, right? It is a fight. And so you kind of want to remember why you're fighting and what it is about the fight that you love.
Yeah, I love that response, to remember that it is a fight. You're going to have to grapple with it sometimes, but just how any good fight, when you have those wins and you're ready for the next battle, you also get the reward of having the win, and the feeling of accomplishment, and that feeling of being able to help other people maybe go through degrees or whatever. And I'm sure it's very fulfilling and satisfying, because although I haven't necessarily, like, because of how new I am to masonry, I haven't helped anybody with a degree, like I haven't like done anything in a degree or anything like that. But just even the fulfillment of talking with my brothers and helping them feel better, or working together as a lodge to work on a project together, it's very fulfilling. Like, yeah, sometimes I was at the lodge till 2 a.m. And thankfully it doesn't take like tons of time out of my life to be a Mason, and I definitely make sure to keep it within reason. So I'm not putting masonry over my other standard, like family or religious beliefs or anything like that. But yeah, there's definitely times where I've been at lodge, kind of late, helping clean up things or preparing like the pork for the shrine barbecue the next day and stuff. And it's fun, it's fulfilling. It is a little bit of a battle and takes your time and stuff. But yeah, you know, that reward is well worth it. So I love what you said there, Cameron. That's awesome. So what symbols, had an impact on you? Because we have different symbols in masonry that we can apply, because Freemasonry is obviously speculative masonry. Instead, we're not out building temples, we're building temples within ourselves, right? And with it, as well as, the outward work too, right? But not necessarily. Freemasonry doesn't do stonework, right? But we do outward stuff too, like you were talking about. But so, like, what symbols have had an impact on you, and kind of why have they? Like, what does that look like?
Masonry. again, going back to what you were talking about, right? The symbols of Freemasonry are all, or not all, but very the majority of them are derived from actual operative masonry or operative stone work or stone tools. And so that's why the most famous example of our symbols, right, the square and the compasses, those are literally two operative stone mason tools. The square used to make sure your angle is 90 degrees, and the compasses to lay your lines and draw your designs in terms of creating plans and making sure everything. So we take these kind of operative stone Masonic tools or even operative stone Masonic examples, such as, King Solomon's Temple, and try to apply them to ourselves. So for me, there was a few, and again, this is uniquely Canadian, uniquely to ritual in Ontario, but there is a couple. The second degree working tools, particularly which there are a lot of different lessons there, but the one that I always take is the idea of equality and why it's important. Um, Also, we have in our lodges, and I don't know if they're in Utah or not. I've never been to a lodge in Utah, sadly, but I hope to change that soon. Um, the uh, it's called like a pavement. It's called a mosaic pavement, and really, I've always loved that symbol because it reminds me of there's also this idea in Freemasonry of the importance of temperance, right? And that kind of ties into the pavement because the idea in the pavement is on it kind of how variable life can be. And so it's very easy, and this is something I struggle with personally, just again because for whatever reason my own personality, and I try to work on this, and Freemasonry helps remind me to work on this, is when things are going well for me, I do have a tendency to become very excited or assume they'll go well forever. And when things are not going so great, I can become pretty despondent about things going badly. um, and within Freemasonry, one of the things we're kind of reminded of is if you're having a good day, be happy you're having a good day and cherish that good day, but don't assume that every day is going to be great and become too kind of presumptuous in your success. And at the same time, if you're having a bad day, it's okay to be upset that you're having a bad day or whatever it is, but don't become too despondent in the negative times, that you forget that there's another day coming tomorrow, and you don't know what that could bring, but it could bring something great. So always trying to remember not to allow the good times to create presumption in you and the negative times to create despondency in you. And that is something that I struggle with personally and I'm working on. So I think that is kind of something that really spoke to me. And then in our second degree, my favorite lecture in all of Freemasonry is the second degree working tools. And for me, that is really the key idea I took from it was the idea of equality. And what that meant is something I always, and even Freemasonry, one of those famous Masonic sayings that made its way into the general lexicon is the idea of somebody being on the level, which, more, it really, now it's come to mean more honest. Right. If I say somebody's on the level, now usually what I refer to in day-to-day conversation is that they're honest. But really what it was referred to is the idea of he's on the level, meaning equality amongst all people, right? And if somebody feels like they're not on the level, it means they feel like they're better than other people for whatever reason.
Right. Kind of like when people get self-conceit or they try to elevate their own image of themselves above other people in their minds or their heart. And then that creates discord between people rather than harmony, you know. And I think that that is a really profound aspect of Masonry is to remind yourself, to be on the level and to look for others, to see them as just like you, and not believe that you're better than them and not elevate yourself above them. And I think there's so much just value in doing that because it's such a human thing to try to get in your own mind or like start to think in those ways, and to see that Masonry and the principles of Masonry can help people kind of overcome that, I think speaks to the craft and what it can do for both individuals and for, groups of people working together. So,
I agree completely. Yeah, and again, it's kind of like this going back to that song metaphor, right? Because even within Freemasonry, if Freemasonry is kind of the song, then within that there's many choruses, many verses, many parts of the song, and everybody will kind of, if you first love the song, then everybody will kind of be drawn to or attracted to different parts of the song. So there are some who, again, everybody goes through. The beautiful thing about Freemasonry, right, is we're all kind of going through our rituals, but there are other people who may be drawn to something completely different than me, and that's what resonates with them, right? And when I'm mentoring brothers, actually one thing I always try to encourage them is, when they perform a piece of ritual, I'll always try to ask them, okay, what does that mean to you? Is there something that speaks to you there, or is there something you don't like? Are you using a word you don't know? Because the ritual, obviously, there's a lot of kind of older words in there, not always common parlance. So figure out what it means to you. One thing I ask newer Masons after their initiation, if I was lucky enough to be there for their installation or their initiation, I should say, is there anything, because obviously, not to go into details or anything, but you're going through Masonry for the first time, so you're just trying to absorb as much as you can. Usually, at least I find, most of it kind of is a blur because they're nervous, excited, whatever it is. But there's usually one or two things that maybe stick with them, and they kind of hear that one thing and they go, "That was interesting." So I usually try to ask them when they're done, like, "Is there anything in there that you particularly stuck out to you, or you remember, or had an impact?" And then that's kind of where I'll start their mentoring with, "Okay, let's maybe start with learning about that particular section."
right.
And so, yeah, find the thing that speaks to you within kind of the overall song of Freemasonry.
And
And don't
then,
be afraid to try to add your own song to it too, or your own part to it.
right. And once you know what that thing is, I guess you can kind of try to implement it into the way you look at the world. And, if it spoke to you, then there might be a reason it spoke to you. And yeah, I love that. That's really awesome. So, okay, cool. So, yeah. So, by the way, the second degree is awesome. I mean, I'm sure there's jurisdictional differences and stuff, but they're all awesome. Don't get me wrong. I
Oh,
love them all. But the second degree truly is really awesome. I love the fellow craft degree.
second degree. Second degree is my favorite degree, right? It's typical. I mean, I'm an only child, but second degree suffers from, I think, typical middle child syndrome, right? Kind of gets overlooked for the first and the third. For I mean, the first is kind of obvious because it's a first degree, so it's you're being brought into Freemasonry, so it's a pretty big deal. Master Mason and the third degree, once you have that, it means you can take an office. It means you can become, more active in a lodge. There are many jurisdictions where business meetings are held in the third degree, so until you get that third, it's hard to even participate necessarily. And so a lot of people, the second degree is just a stepping stone to get from the first to the third, but you never want to take anything for granted in Freemasonry, but don't take that second degree for granted. There's a lot of I know I can't speak for Utah, but I've been to second degrees in different U.S. jurisdictions, and every time I see it, I always like it. So it's a special degree. So don't take it for granted.
Yep. Yep. I have other friends too that the second was their favorite. And it's not the most common, probably the most common I hear is the final degree. The third, the most, that's what I've heard from most people is their favorite. But one of my really, really, really good friends, the second is also his favorite degree, and it spoke to him the most. And so, yeah, that's really cool. So, I guess, like, all right, so what's like, how much do you think of an impact Masonry had on Canada? Like, how old is Canada? Was Freemasonry around in early like in Canada early on? Like, because in America, it had a really profound impact on the founding of America, as you know. So I'm wondering what kind of connections there are between Canada and Masonry And if you know anything about that, I was just curious.
Oh my gosh, I'm by no. I should have got my friend brother Gene Lotz on here because he's been on the podcast and he's a historian, both Masonic and otherwise, and he could talk for hours on that kind of a topic.
I would love to have him on, by the
I
way.
will send him
Yeah.
your info. He's a really cool dude. And a great historian. I mean, I know really the cliff notes, right? So it's hard to say. Like, so Canada was founded in 1867.
Okay.
Um, right. But it's just no different than the States, right? It's not like in the USA, it was like, okay, 1776, there's America. And, the day before that, or July 3rd, there's nothing, and then it just springs up, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and so same thing with Canada, right? There was 1867 and the formation of Canada, which at that time was Canada, Quebec. Oh my God, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. I think I'm getting those messed up. But the four provinces, right? There was Upper Canada, there was Lower Canada, there was the fur trade. To my knowledge, Freemasonry came to Canada. The oldest lodge was 1855. But I could be mistaken about that. I know the first prime minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, was a Freemason, first prime minister of Canada. The most recent to be a prime minister was John Diefenbaker, who was prime minister in the 60s, if I do recall. And he actually, as prime minister, he actually visited the Windsor Masonic Temple. There's a picture of him visiting our Masonic building, which in 1963, if I recall correctly, which is really cool. Obviously I don't know how active, say John A. Macdonald was, brother John A. Macdonald, how active he was as a Mason. I'm assuming he was pretty busy being prime minister. But again, you can kind of
Probably.
that sense of, and you see the same thing with the founding fathers in the States, right? Some of these understandings of the ideals amongst things like equality and um, democracy and um, trying to be a builder of something, whether it's building that stone, whether it's building a stone wall or building yourself or building a country, you kind of see these ideas form in the constitutions and the practices of the country. And then certainly you see in Canada, the US, just really almost around the world, certainly in Western world, you see in the 1920s, especially, and again the 1950s, you see the massive rise in Masonic membership, fueled in many cases by returning veterans from World War I and World War II. And you see, amongst other things, and you see this increased emphasis on civic life and community, and Freemasonry, in many cases, both in Canada and the US, becoming a central hub or a focus of that community life. I mean, when the Windsor Masonic Temple was first built here in Windsor in 1921, it was built in 1921, opened in 1922. But when they did the groundbreaking ceremony, there were thousands of people, according to the newspaper, lining the streets, because having a Masonic temple in your town was a big deal for your civic life, and it kind of meant your town had made it to a certain extent. And so I think even more so than the idea of like the importance from a the prime ministers, the significant historical figures. It was more the significance of just what Freemasonry meant for a community. Oftentimes, a Masonic temple or hall or building was the first place the city would go to if they needed to have, let's say, a vaccination clinic, or if they needed to collect scrap metal for World War, to send overseas during the war, or if they needed a depot to drop off food and supplies to send to, Britain during World War II, or to hold a. There's that song, Copperhead Road, right, where they mention that was from the States, but you see these things in Canada where the Masonic Lodge was being used as the police auction location, where the police would auction off items they found in raids. So it became kind of a hub of the community. And you had the dancers, dancing and all that. So I think more in that sense is really where the importance of it was. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what about Eastern Star and stuff? Is there Eastern Star out
There
there
is there's
in
Trin
Canada?
Star here in Ontario, Canada, as well as obviously in the States, as well as a lot of these different, right? There's a lot of, one of the misconceptions that people have about Freemasonry, um, and many Freemasons have this misconception as well, is that like Freemasonry refers to a single organization, but Freemasonry is an umbrella term that refers to, aside from what I often, when I'm speaking of it, I'm also speaking of it in the sense of AF and AM or F and AM kind of fraternities. There's the Eastern Star, there's Prince Hall, both of which were obviously incredibly important for, in one case, getting women involved in civic life at a time when they weren't even able to vote, and the other one, right, getting Black or African American men or African Canadian men into civic life when they had their rights. Often, in many cases, they had less rights, and so it gave them an
Right,
opportunity to be part of these. And they talk about this actually in Robert Putnam's book Join or Die. Or Robert Putnam wrote a book called Bowling Alone, which became a movie called Join or Die. They talk about the importance of these groups for marginalized peoples. And in Canada, you see, amongst other things, and in the States as well, oftentimes Freemasonry was an organization that allowed First Nations or Indigenous men to join when they weren't able to join many other groups. Um,
right.
and then there's Rainbow and Demolay, which are the youth groups um, for young men and young women. There's the Order of Women Freemasons, which does have chapters here in Ontario as well as primarily out of England. So yeah, it's amazing how, you know Freemasonry, kind of as its umbrella term, encompasses so many different organizations. And then you have the independent bodies, you have York Rite, Scottish Rite Shrine, um, and so that is Freemasonry. But it's also one of the beautiful things about Freemasonry is that if you're interested in it, you can be involved in it, whether you're, male, female, young, or old. There's a group and there's an opportunity for you to be involved in it.
Yep, I think that's awesome how all-inclusive Masonry is, and it's not rejecting people of different races, religions. It's not a matter of creed. It's not a matter of the color of your skin. It's not a matter of any of those things. It's a matter of, is this something that you feel called to and that you are able to based on because there are obviously some things you can't join Masonry if you have a felony, at least in America, and
I
certain
don't
things
think
like
I'm
that.
not sure
But
if that's true. No, sorry to jump in. I think that might depend on the jurisdiction because there are
really,
different. I mean, so right, there's, if I recall correctly, there's 51 jurisdictions in the states. 50 states plus Washington D.C. I think is its own jurisdiction. Um, and I think in some cases there, as part of the application process, there is a criminal record check that you go through, that's required, before you're able to submit your application. In some cases, there's no requirement at the jurisdiction level, but some lodges may themselves request it before you apply. If and then even then, to my knowledge, I could, again, I'd have to go jurisdiction by jurisdiction. I don't believe that in many jurisdictions there being a criminal record is an automatic denial. It's just a piece of information, and I'd assume if there was a criminal conviction, whatever it is, that they would ask you about it, ask you what happened, talk to you about, you know, did you go to jail? What did you do in jail? Did you, are you on the straight and narrow now? What, maybe talk to them about what they learned from the experience, and if they were able to, how, if it ultimately acted as some type of learning experience for them and they were able to come out the other end better. um, or because I do think people can change. um,
yeah, they
but
can.
I do know that there are some jurisdictions where it's an automatic denial, to my knowledge. I just don't know which is which.
Right.
um, in
It
Ontario,
might
right,
be
there's
here. I think it is, but I'm not sure. like in Utah specifically, but I could be wrong about that, and I want to double check and fact check that
I mean,
later.
the idea itself of I'm perfectly, I'm this is just me speaking personally. Again, I don't speak for any other Mason or any group other than myself. Um, I'm a believer in, a lodge to have as much information as it can. So I'm think it makes sense for have a lodge request, a criminal record check, as well as even, potentially a credit check, as well as even medical stuff to just know if there's any. That's primarily like an accommodation thing. Is there any medical issues that we would need to accommodate with this brother, however it might be, for even for, the initiation process or anything like that, to make sure. Because I've seen people go through the initiation process who were older, and it's just a matter of, even walking like a few feet was a real challenge for them. They were joining primarily. It's something they always wanted to do, but never got around to it. And so in that case, how do you help them? Do you need a wheelchair in the lodge, whatever it might be? And so I think all information is better, but I'm always hesitant about blanket. Just when a lodge, I've talked to Masons who say like, I would never allow, let's say, a felon to join or whatever it is. It's like, well,
Right,
I'd never talk to them first and see what happened, because you never
right,
know. And felon can be a very broad term. So
right. Yeah. No, yeah, for sure. And I agree with you. People can change, and you want to look in the heart of a man rather than like, or at least try to gauge how you feel about that person rather than just a label that's been placed on them if they've changed and some and stuff like that. So I think those are really, really good points. And I think that too, you're talking a little bit about the quality of the people that join the lodge too. So like um so when a new person's joining Masonry and we as brothers are kind of determining whether they should be a member of our lodge or not, uh, we want to look for that quality as well. But that has nothing to do, somebody could have done something in the past and they could be like the best person ever for Masonry and be ready to join and be totally a huge asset to the lodge and the brothers.
I mean,
So
it's so hard. It's
yeah.
so hard.
Yeah, there's variables. It's not just a blanket statement thing, is it?
I mean, and probably, I'm just going to take a guess on this, but I feel pretty safe in guessing, to be honest. Probably more ink has been spilled, and more electrons scattered through emails and presentations on this idea of guarding the West Gate than almost any other topic in Freemasonry, right? The idea of how do you ensure that your applicants become, how do you ensure your applicants will become engaged members, right? And I use the word engaged kind of very purposefully, because it's funny, from a retention, if you define retention as members remaining in an organization, then Freemasonry has the best retention rates of any organization in the world. Because you can join, and I mean, I say I know, I've never met them, but there are brothers who joined in 1999, 2000, who are members of my lodge when I was worshipful master. I never met them. They pay every year, or they're a life member, but I never met them. They don't really respond, right? And um, but oftentimes what you would see is people joining but either not showing up or not attending, or people joining and saying it's not for them and leaving, or not getting past their first, second, and third degree. And since I've been joining, I've been hearing this idea of guarding the West Gate, and a lot of times what that means is getting more time to know an applicant before he joins, to make sure that to try to get a sense of, as much as you can, will this person enjoy Freemasonry? Will it be something he wants to be part of? Um, Making sure that he's not joining for quote unquote nefarious reasons, like not joining because he thinks he's going to get $10,000 because he saw some post on Facebook about like the Illuminati or whatever it is.
Yeah, the
And
Illuminati scammers.
yeah, all those guys. And I used to be much more of a guard the West Gate kind of proponent. now I've been around long enough and I've seen enough people join who I thought wouldn't shake out to anything turn out being actually pretty engaged and great Masons, and enough people I thought would be great turn out to be either just demit because they didn't enjoy it, or um, um, become disengaged from it and just not try. And it's so, in some cases, it's just a matter of life, right? Like he joins and he loves it, but his work calls him, and he, he has to move or something. Like it's the variables are so much. I'm slowly coming more to the side of you just take a chance and see what happens. Get to know him as much as you can in terms of things like, again, criminal record. That's a good thing to know about. Um, do a social media check on him, because if he's posting a bunch of crazy stuff about whatever, take your pick. You find out he's posting a bunch of racist memes or whatever it is, might be worth not bringing him in. But beyond that, this idea of like, because some Grand Lodges now are saying, get to know him for a year, take him out to all these things. It's like, you can do that and you might end up being disappointed anyways. It's so hard. It's probably, and I don't know what the answer is. I suspect the answer might actually have more to do with personality assessments, but good luck getting that through a Grand Lodge. But my suspicion is might be there might be specific personality types that respond well to the music of Freemasonry. And if we could test for that, I think, just on my own, very unofficial, very small sample size testing, but I asked a few Masons who were really active and involved and remained active and involved for years. I asked them to take some personality tests and assessments. And one thing we found is they were all scoring really high on curiosity and open-mindedness. So maybe there's
Hmm.
something to that. So who knows?
That's
But
interesting.
it's so hard. Yeah, guarding the West Gate is by far the toughest, I think.
What
It's
personality test did you use?
the Briggs Meyer, the
Oh, that's a good one.
INFPEN, right? And I ended up posting a question on Reddit asking, like, should Freemasons do this? And Reddit was super negative towards it, but the Reddit Masons were like, no, and I don't know enough about. I'm not a social scientist. It's just because again, it goes back to kind of where we were at the start of this. It's like, okay, why is it that Freemasonry again spoke to me, or I just loved the music of Freemasonry in a way that other people who went through the exact same thing as me didn't respond to it in the same way? My suspicion is there may be certain personality traits, at least for I believe it was 10, including myself, that we kind of did the test, and some were extroverted, some were introverted, some were, logical, some were feeling. But the one common trait amongst the 10 was they all scored open-mindedness and high in open-mindedness and high in curiosity. So
That is so cool. I want to take that test again because I don't think I may have taken it once when I was younger. I've been told about it a little and explained to it, but I want to take that test of my own, just for myself and see basically what I score on those things. It'd be curious to see. See, there's the curiosity.
yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me, right? I do suspect that it does make sense to me that people who have high levels of curiosity or open-mindedness are going to be more likely to be active and engaged in Freemasonry, because Freemasonry by its nature is progressive, right? You first degree, second degree, third degree, then you take officer chairs, then there's Scottish Rite, and you'll never reach a point where you know everything. There's always kind of more to learn or more you can do. And so there's going to be a natural, for people who are curious anyways, I think Freemasonry will naturally pique that curiosity and push them in the direction of wanting to be more and more involved, or at least know more and more. So
Right.
is my suspicion, but that again, it's a very small sample size. I just suspect when it comes to this idea of guarding the West Gate, there's probably no perfect answer, but I don't. I think it may, because like I said, I've known applicants. You may as well. I know you're very new in your career, but I've known applicants who, remained an applicant for a year. Often came out to barbecues and social events and public events with the lodge, joined and never came back. So it's
Hmm.
tough to say.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. So I guess like what what would you say to somebody that's new to Masonry or that wants to join Masonry, but what would you say to somebody that wants to join Masonry, but how to prepare for that experience and how to look at that experience to kind of get the best initiation into Masonry and have the best experience joining? Like what expectations would you tell them to have and what kind of like outlook would you tell them to have the best experience?
I would say so. My advice to new applicants is what matters at the start is just, I mean, it goes back to what we talked about. Like, how curious are you, first of all, right? Like, how curious are you about this? Are you are you joining out of a like, are you joining out of a desire for something? Like, you want whatever you want. Again, you fallen for Illuminati scam, or just you're joining because you want something, or are you joining because you have just a curiosity about what awaits you? And I suspect if you have just a genuine curiosity and interest, you'll probably find Freemasonry more enjoyable experience for you overall. The other thing I always say is at the start, because there are some guys who get involved and then even before they join, they are reading, like, they've read Morals and Dogma, or they're looking up a bunch of stuff online about the history of Freemasonry. It's like that stuff matters and it's important. And again, if you're a curious person, you're probably going to start doing some of that stuff anyways. But the at the start, what really matters is just how well you choose to get along with your brothers. And I say choose again purposefully, because you can choose to be an asshole, or you can choose to, right, get along well. And at the start, that is the most important thing. It's just how well are you choosing to get along with the people in the lodge, because Masonic career can be, if you want to be active and engaged and involved, it's 10, 20, 30, 40. I mean, they're the people who are going to be visiting you in your hospital bed when you're 60 or whatever it is. So choose to get along well with the people in your lodge, and never lose this curiosity. And don't join out of a desire to get something. Join out of a desire to contribute to something, right? I always one thing that always kind of stuck in my craw, back in the day, you'd hear this joke. People would talk about job interviews, and they would say, like, they'd always say they hate the question of, why do you want to work here? Because they'd say, well, the answer is obvious. I want a paycheck, right? And to me, it's like, in theory, and forgive me if this sounds privileged or whatever, but you can get a paycheck in a million different places. You can get a paycheck at McDonald's or Burger King, or you can get a paycheck anywhere, right? The reason you should want to work somewhere is because you think you have a specific set of skills or abilities, or can learn something that can contribute. You can make that office better. You can make that place better. Um, and so I think same with Freemasonry. It's like you should join. So I guess that'd be my three piece of advice: join to contribute, um, make an effort to get along with your brothers. Eventually, if you get into more leadership role, that does change, and it's not about getting along with people anymore, because people are going to hear me say that and roll their eyes if they know me, because I've been known to get very passionate in my disagreements with brothers sometimes, though I always make an effort to apologize to them and shake hands after. But that's me now, where I feel like I'm at the stage 20 years in, worshipful master several times, where I feel like I've kind of earned some of that. At the start, I did make an effort to get along with everybody, because they're your brothers, and they're letting you into their organization. So you have a responsibility to get along with them. And then don't ever lose, again, if my very unscientific hypothesis is true, don't ever lose that sense of curiosity about what's next. And it's I have seen brothers, and even I think about now talking, where the kind of the light dims in their eyes after, especially after they become worshipful master for the first time, because they feel like, well, I've become worshipful master. There's nothing left to learn. It's like, no, never lose that curiosity, because there's always something more to learn and always something more to do. So I guess that'd be my 3 pieces of advice.
That's really, really good advice. I especially like the aspect of the contribution. You know, what can you do to, how can you add value to Masonry? How can you add value to your brother's lives? And again, this whole idea the of the getting along with your brothers, you know, when you join Masonry, to make sure that you're doing your best to get along with your brothers. And even, you know, like you said, you're a little bit further along, so there's going to be discussions about things where people are going to have to work things out. But, you know, I think that's also part of really of what having a friend or a brother is all about. Is sometimes when you have a disagreement about something, that shows you both care about the truth, and it really adds an opportunity for both of you to try to figure out what that truth is. And I think that's a form of love too. You know, it's a different kind of form of trying to get along.
I mean, brothers fight, right? Brothers fight.
Yeah.
So brothers are always going to fight. That's never going to be different, whether you're Masonic or blood or any other type of brother, right? You're going to fight. That's just the nature of, I think, you know, to a certain extent, that's the nature of people. But I think that's especially the nature of men. But that's okay, right? There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with fighting as long as you can shake hands after. And you know, my old advice was always to new guys was always that Charles Bukowski poem, "Go All the Way," which I always really liked. Right, if you're going to try, go all the way, or else don't even start. Um, I always liked that poem. I always liked Charles Bukowski, but looking now, I'm a little bit more sanguine about it. I understand that again, people are joining, but they have family, they have things that are going to take them from Freemasonry. So this idea of going all the way, everybody's all the way is going to be different, and it's not always going to be the same thing. So I'm less inclined to give that advice than I was even a couple of years ago, though it still is a beautiful poem. But now what I'd say is the 3 I gave, right? Contribute, get along, and don't lose your curiosity.
Yep, that's awesome. So, okay, cool. So, yeah, I really like what we've had to talk about today. We've had a lot of great points, a lot of interesting aspects of the Masonic experience that we've discussed today, and kind of what it can do for people and for communities. And, you know, I think we had a great conversation today, and I appreciate you taking your time to come on and share your insights. And, you know, you've been along your Masonic journey a lot longer than I have, so I appreciate your your wisdom to share with me. And so I guess, yeah, thank you for taking your time to come on today, Cameron. Do you have anything that you want to plug? Anything you want to add to the tell people to go follow your YouTube channel about Masonry? Is there anything you want to plug in here?
I mean, yeah, obviously, yeah. Please follow my YouTube channel. Actually, I'm not sure. I'm not sure when this will air. We're recording this on March 8th, but tomorrow, March 9th, at 6 p.m. is going to be my. I'm releasing my interview I did with you, where we talk about through your other channel, High Altitude Investing. We talk about ways that Freemasons can engage in cryptocurrency, the positives and the negatives, not Freemasons as individuals exactly, but more like on an institutional basis, the way the institution can engage with Freemasonry, or the way the institution can engage with cryptocurrency, but also the risks and rewards, the potential risks and potential rewards of that engagement. So I loved the interview. So it's you know, we talk about regrets. One of my biggest regrets is how I ended up titling the YouTube channel. I'm not changing it now. It's Square and Compass Promotions, but the and is the and symbol, the ampersand symbol. It's not AND. So it's Square and Compass Promotions. Because everybody always types in Square and spell it out and they can never find it. So Square and Compass Promotions YouTube channel. I do my live streams basically Monday through Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern. And then on the weekends, I have my interviews. Also, I have the Medium page, Square and Compass on Medium, where I write about Freemasonry. So format it lets you delve into things a little bit more deeply or in a different way than video. So that's on Medium. And then I got the Patreon as well. So you can check all of that out. But yeah, no, I love talking about Freemasonry, and the best thing about it is the opportunity to meet brothers I would not meet otherwise, such as yourself. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and I look forward to checking out more of your content, both the high altitude investing, but also wisdom in Christ.
Yeah, thank you, man. And I really, really, really enjoy your live streams. They are awesome. It's fun to hop in the chat box. Uh, it's just a really great thing that you're doing with those live streams. It's fun to watch you do them, and I can tell that you have a deep passion for your channel, for sharing knowledge about masonry, and you're doing a lot of good. So I appreciate your presence online, and thank you for that. And make sure everybody that's listening or watching this podcast, go follow Cameron everywhere you can. He's a great brother, a new friend of mine, and I really appreciate what he's doing. So make sure you guys go follow him everywhere that you can, everywhere that he mentioned. And I'll put links in the description of this video and on the podcast on Apple Podcast as well. So yeah, thank you, man. I appreciate you coming on, and thanks for everybody taking their time out of their day to listen to this. If you guys have any questions about anything that was talked about in this podcast today, you guys can always email me at Wisdom in Christ Foundation at or Dallin at wisdominchristfoundation.org. And yeah, I appreciate you guys tuning in and looking forward to see you guys in future podcasts. Maybe I'll have your historian friend on for a future podcast, and have a wonderful day, everybody. And yeah, thank you for taking the time to tune in.